I don't believe that there were any, card-carrying members of the United States military or NATO. They're sheep-dipped. There were units comprised of nothing but Polish troops that had been serving last year in the Polish military, but now are part of the International Legion of the Ukrainian army. These are Polish volunteers. There were lots of French volunteers. There are units in the International Legion of Georgians and of Americans. There's one unit in particular called the Forward Operation Group, FOG, and they appear not to have been involved in the initial phases of this operation, but were brought in after the fact, almost as if the United States and NATO were saying, oh well, we need to come in and exert a modicum of control over this, or all of our investment is going to be gone. Because that's what happened. They poured billions of dollars into creating this strike force, and it's gone. This was a huge investment by NATO and the United States, and now it's being squandered. And cursed Inspector Scott Ritter, known for his extensive insights into Western military tactics, has long predicted the kind of devastation we're now witnessing in Ukraine. His analysis of the Pava missile strike adds even greater weight to the horror we're about to explore. The initial reports of 200 casualties have since exploded into a much more alarming figure. Over 700 bodies have been pulled from the wreckage, and as emergency teams continue their efforts, more are being discovered. The wounded and missing only add to the chaos. We're facing the tragic reality that nearly 1,000 people might have lost their lives in this single attack, an event that has shattered both the region and those trying to survive in it. Pava has become a harrowing reminder of the relentless destruction raining down on Ukraine, and this is just one piece of the overall devastation. Inspector Scott Ritter's grim predictions seem to be playing out with chilling accuracy. The magnitude of this disaster is overwhelming, but it's only the beginning of an even darker story. The volunteers who rushed to the scene were met with an unimaginable nightmare. These individuals, many of them women and freshly graduated students, came with the hope of saving lives, but what they found was beyond anything they had been prepared for. Bodies, or rather parts of bodies, littered the streets, flung into trees and clinging to walls in grotesque and violent displays of destruction. The emotional toll on these volunteers was immediate. Many of them collapsed in horror, unable to continue as the full scope of the tragedy unfolded before their eyes. To make matters worse, medical supplies were critically low, and those that were available, cheaply manufactured in China, were riddled with defects. Basic necessities like bandages and antiseptics were either unavailable or malfunctioning, leaving the wounded to suffer unbearable pain. Countless lives that could have been saved were lost due to these failures. The scene became one of absolute chaos. Bodies piled on top of each other, some still clinging to life while others had long since succumbed to their injuries. The air was thick with the smell of death and the cries of those left to die in agony. This was not just a battlefield, it was a living hell, a scene straight out of a nightmare that no one should ever have to endure. The human toll of this attack was devastating, but the tragedy was not limited to civilians. Alone, Inspector Scott Ritter has long criticized NATO's deepening involvement in the Ukraine conflict, warning of the inevitable losses that would follow. His predictions have sadly come true. The missile strike didn't just target civilians, it also delivered a devastating blow to foreign mercenaries and NATO personnel operating within Ukraine. The losses were heaviest among Polish and French forces, with Poland suffering the most casualties. But this wasn't just a hit to low-ranking mercenaries. Reports indicate that many of those killed were high-ranking officers and trainers camouflaged as civilian contractors. This raises serious concerns about NATO's covert involvement in the conflict. These personnel weren't just casualties, they were key strategic players. In fact, at least 38 critically injured individuals were airlifted by helicopter to Poland within hours of the attack, signaling their high value. It's believed that many of these individuals held critical positions within NATO's command structure, making their deaths a significant blow to the alliance's operations in the region. Another convoy transported injured personnel to the German border, further cementing the gravity of these losses. The shadowy nature of these evacuations points to the possibility that NATO's involvement is far deeper than previously disclosed. As we peel back the layers of this conflict, we see that information too has become a weapon in this war. In a shocking revelation, Fox News reported that a Ukrainian faction may have sold critical intelligence to Russian forces for a price tag of $500,000. This sale of information, if true, marks a dangerous turning point in the war, where the value of betrayal has a high monetary figure attached. Inspector Scott Ritter has often pointed out the dangers of such internal divisions, and here we see them manifesting in the most costly of ways. The implications are staggering. Did Ukrainian officials knowingly sell out their own foreign allies? Was this a calculated act of desperation, or does it suggest deeper fractures within Ukraine's defense apparatus? The consequences of this intelligence leak have been catastrophic for NATO forces, leading to deadly precision strikes on key positions. The question now lingers. How much longer can Ukraine maintain control of its own narrative, let alone its military operations, when such treachery exists within its ranks? As intelligence becomes as valuable as ammunition, the war on the ground continues to rage. The missile barrage didn't end in Pava. Across Ukraine, Russian forces have launched an all-out offensive using UAVs, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and the fearsome Kinzhal hypersonic missile. Inspector Scott Ritter has long advocated for the strategic use of such weaponry, and this latest wave of attacks shows how effective it can be. Elov, a city that once stood as a symbol of resistance, is now reduced to smoldering ruins. Russian forces targeted key industrial sites and military barracks in and around the city. Videos of the aftermath show towering plumes of smoke and raging fires consuming everything in their path, but the attacks didn't stop at Elov. Ivano-Frankivsk, Khmelnytsky, and other key strategic points in western Ukraine were also targeted. These strikes have crippled Ukraine's ability to mobilize its forces and resupply its frontline units. With each missile that hits its mark, Russia is slowly but methodically eroding Ukraine's capacity to wage war. The impact of these attacks extends beyond the battlefield. Ukraine's economy, infrastructure, and supply lines are all being torn apart one missile at a time. But even as Russia's missiles devastate Ukrainian infrastructure, they continue to target the country's most prized military. One of the most significant victories for Russian forces has been the destruction of a HAR system, one of the key tools in Ukraine's counteroffensive strategy. Inspector Scott Ritter has frequently highlighted the vulnerability of Western-supplied weapons, and this strike really proves his point. Using advanced thermal imaging, Russian forces were able to neutralize the HAR system, along with 2 supporting vehicles and 10 personnel. This isn't just a victory in terms of numbers, it's a blow to Ukraine's technological advantage. HAR systems have been crucial in providing Ukraine with long-range strike capabilities, and their destruction significantly weakens Ukraine's offensive capabilities. The attack didn't end there. The hotel in Sumy, which housed foreign mercenaries, was also targeted and obliterated. The precision of these strikes has been devastating to Ukraine's foreign support network. Adding to this list of losses is the destruction of a Patriot air defense system in Kiev, which was confirmed by the death of Colonel Viktor Pivan, the commander of Ukraine's 160th Air Defense Brigade. With each of these losses, Ukraine's ability to defend its skies and protect its assets diminishes, leaving it more vulnerable to future strikes. While Ukraine's military capabilities are being systematically dismantled, Russia is bolstering its own defenses. Crimea, Russia, meanwhile, is taking no chances with its own security. The strategic deployment of S-300, S-400, and even the advanced S-500 air defense systems to Crimea signals a significant shift in the war's dynamics. Inspector Scott Ritter has repeatedly stressed the importance of these high-tech systems in securing Russian assets, and now we see them in action. These systems are likely being deployed to shield critical infrastructure, possibly even nuclear assets in southern Crimea. The significance of these deployments cannot be overstated. Capable of neutralizing incoming threats from hundreds of kilometers away, these air defense systems create an impenetrable shield around Crimea. This ensures that any attempts by Ukraine to strike Russian-held territory will be met with overwhelming force. As Ukraine's offensive capabilities diminish, Russia's defense posture strengthens, making any future Ukrainian incursions even more difficult, if not impossible. While Russia secures its defenses, Ukraine is faced with an internal crisis that threatens to unravel its government. As the battlefield continues to shift, Ukraine's internal political landscape is in complete disarray. A massive cabinet reshuffle is underway, with key ministers resigning or being forced out. Deputy Prime Minister V.D. Chuk, Industry Minister Kazym Sin, and Justice Minister Malice are among the most notable resignations, but there are more to come. Rumors are swirling about the resignation of Foreign Minister D. Kaba, a key figure in Ukraine's diplomatic efforts. Inspector Scott Ritter has often pointed out that Ukraine's internal fractures could prove just as dangerous as the external conflict, and here we are seeing those cracks widen. These resignations are not voluntary. They are part of a larger restructuring effort driven by pressure from within. This political shakeup comes at a critical time when Ukraine can least afford instability. Even the Minister of Territory Integration, who oversaw regions attempting to reintegrate with Ukraine, has resigned. It seems as though many key figures are jumping ship before it sinks, leaving Ukraine's government in a precarious and dangerous position. And even as the government crumbles, Zelensky is making bold yet perilous moves in the hopes of turning the tide. In a recent interview with NBC, President Zelensky made a surprising declaration. Ukraine plans to hold on to Russian-occupied territories, including Kyiv, as leverage to force Russia into negotiations. Inspector Scott Ritter has often criticized this type of brinkmanship, warning that it could backfire in catastrophic ways. Ukraine's strategy is clear: to use these occupied territories as bargaining chips in future peace talks. But with the country facing internal collapse and its military stretched thin, this could be a gamble Ukraine cannot afford. Holding these territories while simultaneously fending off Russian advances and managing a divided political landscape places Ukraine in an almost impossible position. Zelensky's statement signals a willingness to continue the fight, but it's unclear if Ukraine has the resources or the time to execute this plan successfully. Inspector Scott Ritter has repeatedly warned that Ukraine is facing not just a military battle, but a political and existential one as well. His predictions seem more relevant than ever as Ukraine teeters on the edge of collapse. With mounting casualties, crumbling defenses, and a fractured government, the future looks increasingly bleak for Ukraine. The skies remain dark, filled with the sound of missiles and the cries of those trapped in a never-ending conflict. The war has no end in sight, and as each day passes it becomes clearer that Ukraine is fighting a battle on multiple fronts, one that it may not be able to win. Let me make a 10-minute video on this topic.